Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the BLSI, and especially to the BLSI World Affairs series. My name is Andreas Wasmuht, and I'm the convener for World Affairs, and for my sins, also the speaker today. So I have aptly called this talk Crisis Britain. Now, I hope it will be clear by the end of the presentation why that is the case. But I don't want this to be just a presentation today. I actually want this to be a group discussion, because I think we're finding ourselves in uncharted territories, really, economically, socially, politically, that really it's important for all of us to have our opinions, really, and discuss it, because not enough discussion is taking place. There's lots of monologues in the media and with politicians. And I think what's really, really important is that we actually have something that gives us real gravitas in terms of how we proceed. So, without further ado, for those people in the room, I think the only thing I would mention is that what you would need to do in case of a fire test or fire alarm, it hasn't happened, so it won't happen today, but just in case it does, you have to walk down the stairs, out of the front of the buildings where you came in, turn right, end of the road, turn right again, and assemble at Chapel Green. That's all you need to do. So I think that's as far as the audience in the room is concerned. As far as the audience online is concerned, what I would just hasten to add is that you will also have your opportunity to be part of the discussion. And I will project you onto the screen afterwards, after the quick presentation that I will give context to tonight's discussion. But then I want the vast majority of the time really to be a group discussion. So I will hurtle through the slides. You will see the slides, the next slide. So it won't be a big, deep diagnosis. What I will commit to after the talk is to actually send out the slides to everybody in the meeting, so you can dig further and actually get much better impression of what is going on. So before I go on, let me just see. This isn't working for some reason, which is a bit shame. Let me just stop the share and let's try this again. Yeah, the technology is. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not even. Oh, here we go. Okay, so the context of today is really. I'm not looking at crisis or several crises. What I'm trying to portray today is a collection of issues that we're facing that all are coming together, but they're all interrelated, they're all connected, and they're all interdependent. And they're actually causally affected as well. So I'm going to rattle through this very quickly. The reason why I put this slide up is because in the media, what the media is telling us, this will be the deepest recession in 100 years, since the Wall Street crash, basically. And, you know, Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, has said this will be a deep recession lasting not just in 2022, but 23 into 2024. So there is obviously, the Bank of England has done their work. Socially, we are feeling the pinch, and I think, as you will probably hear, the autumn statement will not be a typical conservative autumn statement. There will be tax increases of some forms, etc. And then socially, I think we're all feeling the pinch. So I want to. There's lots of things here on the slide, and I'm not going to cover all of them now, but there's lots of dynamics, lots of moving targets. And I'm not even talking about really global issues like environmental issues and climate change and COP27, because they are beyond the shores of Britain alone. They are global issues. So without further ado, here we go. Politics. So this is a slide that is unusual. In any one year, and these are the four states, big states of office of states. So far this year, we've had 3 prime ministers. We had 4 foreign secretaries, 4 chancellors of the exchequer. We had 3 home secretaries and 2 foreign secretaries. And then we have issues in terms of resignations, Gavin Williamson, for example. We've got somebody jetting off to celebrity, get me out of there. I've got a question mark there, and the question mark is probably somebody else who's currently in the news. It could be Dominic Raab, it could be sorts of others. And I think what it means is, and it's certainly, and I think Rishi Sunak admitted this much today, the UK has lost some political credibility. Over a period of time. This is not something that happened really recently. This is something that's happened over a period of time. But I think it's a lack of gravitas in terms of the politicians, and also the perceived capability, and to some extent, most fundamentally, the integrity of that. So this is the upshot. Now, in terms of what is done, you can see that slide. The one line here at the top there is this Liz Truss, new PM. I don't know whether you can see that, but that's just here, that line. Is actually caused a lot of damage in the voting for the Conservative Party. I mean, at one point, I think the Labour Party was ahead of 30 percentage points. I think it's narrowing slightly now. But I think what's interesting is, in the UK, it is effectively a two-horse race, even now. Because you look at the bottom lines, they haven't really shifted. Lib Dems and everybody else, and SNP, etc., they're very much the same. So we're still in an environment where really it is a two-horse race. And I want to talk on that. That's also part of the problem. So this is the electoral results from the last election, general election. And, you know, coming from Germany, I'm not used to this first past the post. You know, we have sort of proportional representation. And actually, it is a natural way of life for different political parties to have to work together and negotiate something. And in the past, in the UK, it's always been perceived as a weakness. If you don't have a majority, you're a weak government. And I think that is part of the problems that we actually face. So in no other country where there's proportional representation, you've got a share here of 43% for the Conservatives. Would that give you a majority of 80 seats in the House of Parliament? It just wouldn't happen. So I think this is something that is really crucial to resolve. We come on to that. But I see that as part of the crisis in which we live. Okay. The other thing is, this is a political issue, although it revolves around North Sea oil and gas. This is the production of North Sea oil and gas over time, and is also reminiscent of the reserves that are left. So given the current consumption in the UK of oil and gas, the assumption is that there's about 5 years worth of oil and gas reserves left if we would have to fund all of our requirements ourselves rather than getting it from abroad or in other countries. So what the point here is, very quickly, is that a lot of the North Sea oil has been exploited and the revenues have been banked, but the question is how they've been banked in the 1970s and 80s and so on. Is it because of tax reductions and tax cuts, or was it like the Nordic countries have done, built the investment into infrastructure, which they're now benefiting from? So, question. Okay, the politics in terms of energy, and we come on to that in a little bit. On the left-hand side here, you will see that actually 40% of electricity in the UK is still produced using gas. And that, to some extent, is why the electricity price is linked to the gas price. And, you know, if you're like me, a responsible citizen of the world who's got solar panels and has got a battery in his garage and he drives an electric car, I get very upset that my electricity prices are linked to gas. And again, something to discuss later. We then have the UK has much less gas stored than other European countries, as you can see on the slide. So again, you know, there are issues that are global but are of specific importance or relevance in the UK. Here we go. Here's another one. This is from an assessment. This is quite interesting. So this is nothing to do with the two gentlemen here, although both Mike Carney and Andrew Bailey, so the present and past governor of the Bank of England, are effectively publicly saying we're in deep trouble. And Mike Carney is more open about Brexit and the impact Brexit has had to Andrew Bailey, because obviously he's the current governor of the Bank of England. So I think there's something there. But this slide here, basically, and you can't really see it, but there's what the Council for European Reform, or the Centre for European Reform, has done here. It's done a slide where it created a UK by looking at algorithms of all the other countries in the EU, and then likened it to what is most like to the EU. And they've run various models. And basically, the models are showing that since Brexit, Britain has missed out on GDP. It has missed out on gross fixed capital formation, which is basically fixed asset investment, which is the one on the right. It has missed out on the total trade of goods, to the tune of some 31 billion, but it is benefiting in terms of the sale of services, and specifically financial services. So there are upsides, but in terms of products, downside; in terms of GDP, downside; in terms of fixed asset investment, downsides. Okay. Also, I want to sort of focus on debt. I see that this is government debt. This is not overall debt. So you can see in terms of leverage, the UK for the first time is now debt is now 100% of GDP, just exceeded that, and it also the debt level in terms of percentage of GDP as debt as part of GDP is actually quite high. So it's over 100% on the left-hand chart there. I think only the PIGS countries, as they used to be known, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, are actually higher. So again, the managing of future debt, and this is government debt as opposed to corporate and household debt, is going to be important. Okay, and then again, the leveraging on the right-hand side in terms of GDP is part of general increase, whether it is increasing in terms of GDP wealth, again, is an issue as far as debt is concerned in the UK. Okay, now we're coming to the economic side of things now. We know that inflation is at a 40-year high, yeah, because it's not actually 9%, it's probably tracking slightly higher now. We've also haven't seen interest rates of the ilk that we're seeing them now for probably about 14 years. I think it was in 2008 when it came down from 3% to lower than that. So not quite the same period of time. I think what is interesting now is that we're actually in a place where actually you've got inflation and no growth. So I think, the stagflation model. Now the issue is I still remember interest rates of 15%. I think if you look back into the 1980s and Norman Lamont increasing interest rates in one day, I think, to 15% from something closer to 5%. And I was looking to buy my first house then. So I think you can imagine that didn't go down too well. So, but I think the problem now is that we have a whole generation that have actually known nothing other than more or less zero interest rates, and this comes to most people now as a big shock. Okay, the same is sort of highlighted in this slide. Again, it's probably not visible, but I think the CPIH, which is the best measure of inflation, because it also includes household costs like council tax and things like that. You can see on this slide that actually services in particular are really high. They're sort of trending at about 15%, and then goods and services slightly below that. But in the blended total here is about 10 to 12% inflation as we stand at the moment. And on the right-hand side, you have a slide that actually shows negative growth, which is particularly driven by a reduction in production, in productive output in the UK. Not services, but productive output. And again, I will share the slides with you because there's some slides in here that are a bit busy. Okay, we talked about economic already. But I think what I wanted to show this slide again is because it's also an economic impact. The idea that actually we can just exploit more and more of the North Sea oil by just actually digging deeper and more extensively in fields that are still there, it just doesn't make economic sense for some of them, because the cost of some of the other alternatives has come down to such an extent that actually companies will not willingly continue to explore past this sort of 10 years time horizon, want to exploit North Sea gas and oil on the basis that it's actually more expensive to extract than some of the alternative energy sources. So I'm rattling through this, so please, bear some of this in mind when we come to discussion, because I really want to have the major part of this to be part of the discussion. So that is one of the aspects. Now, what entertains business in terms of what are they worried about? This is smack bang up to date from the Office of National Statistics, and it compares small businesses and big businesses. So the darker line is all businesses, and the lighter blue line is all size businesses, excluding the really small ones. So you've got either all businesses or the big organizations. And as you can see, inflation is one of the number one priorities, but energy prices has actually increased and is actually now leading the way in terms of the biggest concern that organizations now have about the future. And this is something that they feel is something that is there to stay. And again, to some extent, that is a global issue, or at least a European issue, with the war in Ukraine and the increase in energy prices there. But it's not just the Ukraine issue that has driven market prices high. And although some of the wholesale prices are coming down, in terms of, that's not reflected on the pump, and I'll show that in a second. So inflation, key, energy prices is also one, and then you're looking at other things like supply chain disruption. And I think that is something else that we're going to dwell on. So those kind of things, interest rates, energy prices, inflation, and also problems with actually sourcing the supply chains across borders. And again, that Brexit is one of these factors. And that's why I said at the beginning, this is multifaceted. It actually covers all parts of the socio-economic and political environment. So you can't just look at one in isolation, because one issue in one field affects others. Okay, so the next one is, again, supply chain. So this is supply chain. So the top bar and the lighter one on the left, that bar shows how many people in the business people are concerned about supply chain issues and what they are actually concerned about. So the top one is wholesale and retail trade. That's the top line. The next one is manufacturing. The third one is accommodation and food services. The next one down is construction, and then you've got things like healthcare and then transport next. So all of these, all the way down to transport, 20% of all businesses feel that currently there are supply chain issues. There's also specific Brexit issues. And again, on the right-hand line, you have two lines. The blue line is all about export. This is UK businesses. Export, the red line underneath, is all about import. And it's basically saying, what are people worried about there? So one is the change in exchange rates is a big issue, and it continues to be, particularly in terms of imports. A change in transportation costs is the second area down. Again, similar for exports and imports. You then got additional paperwork, again, for both import and exports, our key issues. Custom duties and levies, much more of an issue for imports. And then time taken for checks at borders is the next one down, again, roughly similar. So there is a disruption to trade, never mind the supply chains in terms of economic partners across the pond. Okay, and then the SAP did a study, which basically, I think you can just about read here. Disruption will impact the public's life. 34% of businesses expect to see reduced availability of healthcare products. 62% said they expect to see reduced availability of raw materials in the UK, importing. 51% expect disruption to public transport due to lack of drivers. This could be trains, it could be coaches, it could be planes, and I think we've already seen that in the aviation industry. Okay, all chirpy stuff so far. So I think the idea is that this isn't supposed to be the happy bit. The happy bit comes when we're trying to sort of talk about the group discussion in terms of what can we possibly do to address some of these issues. Okay, and on it goes. Labour shortages on the left-hand side because of Brexit. As you can see, Italy has got particular problems. The next one down is the UK, and then followed by the US, and then France and Canada have actually seen an increase in labour force since the pandemic. And from pandemic start, also read Brexit in terms of its impact. And then Brexit in terms of the percentage change in trades in goods and services, part of share of GDP, that's that measure. It's gone up in certain countries. It has gone down significantly in the UK. So there is something around trade that really needs to be looked at from an economic point of view. Okay. Corporate debt. Let me just say the aggregate. So the total income, the GDP of the UK, is currently around 2.2 trillion. Now, aggregate corporate debt itself accounts for 1.4 trillion pounds. The rest of it, the government is taking on a lot more debt as well, which we've seen early on. And household debt is the third debt, which we're going to come to in a little while. So there's some big issues. And also the fact that 99% of UK business population and also is SMEs who account for 3/5 of the employment and half of the private sector turnover is also an issue when we look at SMEs. And you can see on that side, the corporate debt, the large corporates are generally in both the in manufacturing as well as in service industry are relatively level from one period to the other. But this one here, the SMEs are actually going up by 25% in terms of debt. So they're leveraging. They really have to sort of shore up their businesses as part of this. So again, not a happy reading. Okay, now we're coming to what affects us personally. So we've gone from the political side, we've gone to economics, which is a more aggregated level, and now we're coming on to what happens, what we think about as individuals on an ongoing basis. So there's two charts there. One on the left is mortgage debt in the UK. So the mortgage debt in the UK is somewhere around just over £100,000, the average. And given that there are 11 million mortgages out there at the moment in the UK for 29 million households, so so we're talking over a third, 35 to 40% of people households have mortgages, and in London it's over 202,000. In fact, the average rental price in London has now just gone up to £2,200 a month. And again, people are finding it, and this is another structural problem. And I think it's a political issue really, rather than anything else. For some reason, the house market, the property market, has increased because it's seen as an investment. But actually, the rental market is now tracking the house price market. And that sometimes is because you've got mortgages that actually landlords are taking on themselves, and if they increase, they have to increase the rents. So mortgages is a big issue. Personal debt, excluding mortgages, so credit cards, loans, and things like that, is also on the up. And I think, given the pressure we're in terms of the cost of living crisis, also may well increase over the next 2 years. And I think that's Andrew Bailey's estimate. The next 2 years are going to be extremely rough. Okay, this is I think the one that's been in the news. So this is the energy prices, the average sort of tariffs, ambling along all around at £1,000, averaging sort of 1,000 to 1,205 is the energy price cap, all the way from January 2012, and then we get to January 22, and all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. This is where the graph just goes up. And the government has obviously now capped the energy cap at 2,500 for for the average household usage. But that was going to be guaranteed for much longer than it is now. It's now only guaranteed for 6 months. So God knows what happens in the spring in terms of that. The forecast is already that actually the original default cap of 3,500 is probably where we're going to be. So the average cost to an average household of energy prices of £3,500, whereas previously it has been around £1,000. So less than a third of where we're heading. And it's 2.5 times what we're used to, even with the 2,500 energy price cap. Again, so these are things that affect us personally. Prices, this is oil prices. So again, this is petrol prices at the pump. On the left-hand side, you've got fuel, petrol. On the right-hand side, you've got diesel. And you can see that the current price for petrol, and that is about 160, 165. And the diesel price is around 190 or so. Okay, and diesel was about nearly £2, and I think unleaded went up to nearly £2 as well, a month or two ago. So it's come down a bit. But, if you look at this historically, this is unprecedented. I mean, this slide goes back to 2013. It is in terms of transport costs for companies, in terms of transport costs for individuals, it is a key issue. And then we've got things like food price inflation. So this is straight from the Office of National Statistics in September. So, it's quite fresh off the press. And you can see some of the price increases. If inflation is running currently at 10%, you've got things like low-fat milk increasing by 42% year on year, margarine 30%, milk, etc. So it goes down, milk, flour, etc. Some of the increases are mouth-watering. Eye-watering, not mouth-watering, eye-watering. And I think the key thing is not all of this is down to Ukraine either. So, things like oats, things like cereals and some of that kind of thing has been impacted massively by the Ukraine, but by all means not all. And I think one of the things we come back to later is, should a country have some form of self-sufficiency for critical items like energy, water, food, which is something that we can discuss later on. So I know I'm going very fast, and I know it's lots of stuff, but I think it's hopefully will frame the discussion a bit later on. Okay, I'm nearly finished, so I'm going to be gone by about half an hour. That's what I wanted to achieve, so we've got plenty of time for discussion. The other thing from a social point of view is the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of income equality or inequality. Now, inequality, so if you have a Gini coefficient, and this chart goes from 0 to 1, actually goes from 0 to 0.6, because that's the highest inequality, which happens to be in South Africa on this chart. This is OECD data, very recent. Now, the red bar there in the middle, towards the right, that's the UK, with a Gini coefficient of about 0.33, something like that. So quite high up on the OECD league table in terms of inequality. So the higher the coefficient, the less equal the society is. And if you've got a Gini coefficient of 1, then all wealth is vested in one person. If you've got a Gini coefficient of 0, it is equally distributed across the whole of the population. So again, compared to most of the OECD countries, Britain is actually quite highly leveraged, highly unequal. And then household disposable income expressed in terms of per capita income, and in terms of what your surplus income is available. Again, that trend is trending negative in the UK, and again, you've only got very few countries that actually seen a positive increase in recent months. This is only a period in Q2 2022, and these are just changes in disposable income. So this is before the real impacts have hit. So you could imagine that actually with the fuel prices, with the food prices, fuel prices, etc., that's something we'll have to give. And I think the autumn statement on Thursday will be very interesting. Will be a unique experience as far as the Conservative government is concerned, because there's 55. I think he's saying, Jeremy Hunt is saying, he will have to find £55 billion, and some of that will be through tax increases, and some of them will be spending cuts. And some of this could be by reducing the threshold for higher income, high income from 150,000 to 125,000. Council tax has been mentioned. So there's going to be some pain on Thursday for us individually. And again, that is just a short-term fix to some extent to overcome what has become a problem. And I think it would be totally disingenuous to put all of this down to the mini-budget. The mini-budget has done huge credibility damage, and it has shown that actually emulating the US in terms of spending your way out of things and giving tax cuts is not being perceived well by the market. But by no means the situation I'm describing has nothing really to do just with that mini budget. I mean, there's only so much damage you can do in 47 days in office. Yes. So I think it's, I feel sorry for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng in that regard, that actually they have tried something and it failed. But the underlying symptoms of where we are today are not born in that mini budget. They were there before. Okay, and then I think this is the final slide, and I think this is the nail in the coffin to some extent, and then we're going to hopefully make it more positive. So this is, again, the property market and mortgage rates. So I've already mentioned 11 million mortgages out there. The average mortgage is in the round of about £100,000 or so. So this is huge. And the interest rates that you can see there going up. On the left-hand side, you see October 21, and you see on the right, you probably saw September 2022. So over a period of just over a year, interest rates, but this is mortgage rates, have gone from average of about, 3.6% all the way to 5.1%. A huge increase. And then if you think about that in terms of what that means to monthly extra payments on your mortgages, that's very significant. So that in itself is a problem. What is more of a problem is that actually, if you look at the research that's been done with the Barclays and NatWest and Nationwide and Lloyds, etc., the prediction is that we're due for a property value adjustment that is higher than it has been in any period, even potentially bigger than the crash of 2007 and 2008. So again, potentially. But the range of areas is, so Barclays, for example, best case, prices go up by 10%. Worst case, they go down by 22%. Right? Now West says, best case, go up 5.5%. Worst case, go down 20%. Lloyd says, there is no upside. Best case is minus 2.7%. Worst case is 17.9%. So, this is how I want to finish in terms of the real issues that are facing us. And that's why this is not a business talk that Vicky now organizes. This is why it's a world affairs talk, because it is a current affair issue that is beyond economics. It strays into all sorts of other things. And I think that's why I would really enjoy with you to see what can be done to fix some of this. And this is a group discussion in a second. Now, to tee that up now, I've given this some thought, and I think my considerations, and you can ignore them at your leisure, please, and come up with your own, but I have come up with some which we really need to tackle. On the political front, we need to move away from mediocrity to a form of meritocracy. And what I mean by meritocracy is actually having people in the job that have got experience, capability, and a passion for that role, as opposed to career politicians. One. The second political one is infrastructure investment and commitment to green as part of an investment program rather than just reducing taxes which are unfunded. You can have unfunded investment in the future which produces positive value. Reducing taxes by themselves is a huge gamble as to whether that would come off. The other one I mentioned, self-sufficiency in key industries, food, energy, water, and so on. Is this something that a country should really focus on? I know we're globally connected, but we can't always rely on international supply chains. So I think some form of sufficiency or better sufficiency than we're having would be a key thing. And then finally, electoral reform. The two-party idea is dead in the water. It just doesn't work. We just look at America right now. I can just see the court cases being spawned over the midterm elections, and despite that, Donald is standing again for president in 2 years' time. So I think electoral reform is definitely required. I think two-party state where one party has a majority and effectively runs a democratic tyranny for 4 or 5 years is just so out of date for multifaceted and complex international and global and local issues. That's the political side. On the social side, we're talking about Sizewell, A, B, C, and so on. Big infrastructure investments, which again, I think the future is probably micro energy production, local production, rather than centralized production. The other thing I feel we need to tackle is our perception of the housing market. Yeah, the housing market in the UK has become an investment market like any other, certainly since the 1970s, 80s. And actually that isn't reflected elsewhere in the world. And I always give that example. I could go back to Germany now and buy my grandparents' house, which was sold in 1982, for the same price now, just accounting for inflation. And because it's a very different attitude. And I think we need to move from an attitude in the housing market to a housing market to a home market. It's actually our home that we live in rather than an investment that we want to pass on. Global to local, so have global interactions, have global interdependencies, but actually some of the stuff we don't need to have internationally. So if you go to the supermarket now, we should be much more locally orientated rather than internationally. Or do we need, 75 brands of orange juice, for example? The next one is universal basic income. Oh, that's the contentious one. So, given the poverty, given the income disparities, is it time to consider something like a universal basic income? So actually you set an income for everybody at a level that actually helps them to survive. We're not talking more than that, but actually to survive. So again, huge discussions. Finally, on the other side of things, on the economic side, we need to deleverage. Corporate debt is much too high, 1.4 trillion. And also it sits also in the financial services side of things, not just in production. We need to look at the financial instruments and how we do that, because things like derivatives, as you could see with the bond market after the mini budget, if the financial market is highly leveraged, things can go very wrong very, very quickly. Future technologies, again, one of my observations would be it is essential for the UK to have its own manufacturing and production capability, not just rely on services. And I think you probably saw in the press today, Paris is now overtaken London as the premier stock exchange in Europe in terms of volume. So I think relying on financial services alone is not the answer. Increase productive capability and look at the structure of financial investments and instruments. So that is it. So thank you so far for listening to doom and gloom, but I hope it provides some context. So I think it's really useful now to move into a group discussion and actually show where we could go. Maybe we start online, by the way. You can now unmute yourself and show your screen if you want to partake in the group discussion. And we'll start off in the room. So you've seen the three areas: political, economic, and social. Why don't we start to home? Why don't we start on the social side? What is affecting us at the moment? So let's talk about food prices. Does anybody have any comments in terms of what we can do to tackle food prices? What? Yeah. I think you need to use the microphone so people can hear you on.
I suggest that we could grow our own and maybe How many people in one audience or yes.
Those sort of areas that can be used.
Yeah.
Big more places.
Yes.
You might want to share the microphone because we've got an online audience, and hopefully the online audience can hear us.
Okay. There is a shortage of land if you want to get the allotment in all parts of the country.
Yeah.
Nations lost their empires and actually
Okay. Yeah. No, so it's just that the people are commenting. Could you repeat the question? So I think what you're saying is that actually we're far too complacent. Right.
As a country.
So you don't think
the appalling childishness of political behaviour really rather emphasises that. We're going back to the nursery rather than actually trying to get into the 21st century.
Okay. Well, this is really good. So, out of everybody in the room, how many of you feel that actually our current politicians are a key issue for the country? Hands up.
A key issue as in their quality.
Is their quality, the slide out, integrity, capability, and really passion for the role. So quite a few. Okay, so we've got quite a few hands up now who want to ask questions. So maybe we go to the gentleman there. But if you can speak directly into the microphone like this. Now, really, that was. Yeah.
You mentioned being self-sufficient. There's never been self-sufficient in food. At the moment, we import at least 40% of our food. But in fact, we had the common sense to join a club that was 100%, 100% of it food. So, the EU, we know we import bananas and things like that, but I mean, as far as having enough food for ourselves, the EU had enough. And that was part of the reason for the formation of the EU. Yeah. Because after the war, the clever politicians were desperately worried about starvation in Europe.
Yeah.
So, being part of that, anyway, that's the message. We are not self-sufficient, and we probably never will be, but as far as Europe is concerned, we are.
Okay, good. Just to let the person here, Crisp Theatre, if you could, because there's lots of background noise, so if you could be on mute until you want to ask a question, that would be great. Okay, so the EU. So we're talking about the EU now. So you actually said, have you got a comment about that?
EU food.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, one could argue that any crisis is a chance for a solution. And one could also argue that prices for food in Britain were actually too low, especially for farmers. For example, milk. Milk has actually now a realistic price. The consumers pay for milk actually what milk ought to cost in producing. That's one of the things, and this goes for many other food stuff. I think what we have to get used to it, that in future the level of food prices is going to be stable on this level. I mean, Britain is not anymore in a gigantic food bank where you actually can, Brussels can regulate the flow of certain commodities. I mean, perhaps the problem is that, for example, British export of food is stagnating because of traditional markets for lamb, for example, have fallen away by the wayside, and there's obviously not enough New Zealand lamb and South African beef to compensate for it. So, literally, Britain is actually in an island now, food-wise. And that's something to come to terms. It could be actually a rethinking what role agriculture has in this country. Agriculture has been slashed so hard in the last decades. It's a percentage. British farmers don't have the same status nor the same income than some farmers on the continent.
So again, there's some structural issues in agriculture and in food in particular. And actually the fact that the costs of things like milk are now reflected as the proper true price actually raises issues in terms of, again, there's just one part of the economy, i.e. the farmers, actually having to increase their price in terms of actually making a living, and that gets passed on to consumers. And then you've got other issues in terms of the EU, in terms of the agricultural levies and support and policies, which are no longer going to be in place as far as the UK is concerned. So also some structural issues there. Somebody else had their hand up?
And this lady was first.
You asked the question. Okay. You asked the question about whether it's politicians. The question is, it's the political system that creates the politicians that we have. And the most successful activities politically are those where you get cross-party groups working together on particular issues. Now, if you had a political system that chose specific issues and you went across the political sphere, you actually get success in Parliament. But we have the politicians we deserve because it's short-termism. You actually have people operating on a 4-year basis, and even those politicians who come in committed to their constituency in order to make the system work for them, play the game. And if you changed one thing about this, you'd go for proportional representation and you'd choose topics that we was working.
Okay, so that's really interesting, because what you're saying then is having these cross-party policy groups is obviously one way of doing it within the existing political framework. But you then followed it up by saying, well, actually, that's not good enough. So actually, proportional representation means that actually you're going to have people's, whatever they get in the vote, percentage-wise, is how they're going to be represented. So you wouldn't want to stay with the two-party system, first past the post. So because that is possible, the cross-party groups, there's lots of cross-party groups, but you actually want to go one step further and actually go to a proportional representation where people actually have to negotiate and work with each other on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely, because I think if one does that, then what you actually do in that system is you create a degree of creativity in the political environment. It's feasible and it's been done.
Right.
I think if you look at what happened with Italy.
So you just wait.
And with Italy, they had a single problem, and they brought technocrats in, and the technocrats actually started to make some sense out of the Italian political system. And if you go back, I think, with 20 years, what did government have? Government had the civil service, and the civil service were the bastions of policy and how things worked. And we've seen an increase in that. I think it's something like 20 special advisors in the PM office. And when you see them, you think, well, what qualifications do you have and experience do you have to be able to come in and be a special advisor at that level?
Yeah.
And you haven't been elected. So I think there's that which speaks to that point. But to your point about it feels as if it's very easy to pin a lot of blame on politicians. But if you look at us as a country, to a certain extent, we're losing our way. Politicians are not the only voice. We don't hear from other groups that have a voice in this country. They're almost either stifled or mute when it comes to talking about these issues.
Yes.
And increasingly, we're driven by, and I saw in the chat someone talking about the media, we're driven by short-term media, and a lot of it is either blatant lies or pursuing a certain angle. And some of those other institutions have been silent and are silent, so we need to hear from them.
Yeah.
And we need that purpose again. We need some leadership to give us a vision of where do we want to take this country, because it's not going to happen on its own.
No, and I think this sort of diversity of opinion and pluralism is really, really, really important. I suppose the key issue around that is not whether that's a good thing for itself, that everybody has their own share of opinion and facts. But I think the key issue is, how do you bring this to a conclusion? You know, how do you build that consensus? How do you build that negotiation process? How do people come to a finally shared and agreed position that people are, that's the tricky bit, isn't it?
Can I just ask which other institutions you refer to? I think when for me, I find it incredible we don't hear from any of our religious leaders, and I don't care whether they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish. There isn't the vocal, this is not right. We can't carry on living like this, and at least taking a position and calling it out, and we don't hear from them. And also from academia, we hear very little from academia, and to a certain extent, they have that gravitas because they have the intellect, and some of them are technocrats, and so they're either they don't get into the media and they're not picked up in the media, or they don't feel that they. Even the armed forces, my goodness, we've got loads of institutions that just don't say anything.
Yeah.
So that's one I'm really, I'm probably missed a few, to be honest.
We take one more in the room, and then we go on to see whether people online also have them. I see Ben is sort of showing his video, so hopefully, Ben, do you have a question after the next one? Ben, online?
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me in the room?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I agree with the change in the political system completely. I think proportional representation would help nurture a more consensual style of politics, even though it might be more difficult to forge relationships. I think the way that we face each other in Parliament and basically bark at each other every Wednesday is embarrassing, I think, for the country, and it trickles down, I think, to the general population. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I think we need to do is spend more money in a redistributive way. So more money on poorer people, because they're the people who are going to bear the brunt of all the issues that you've talked about today.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Good. Anybody else online before we go to the room? Okay, we'll go to the room and then come back to online. Gentleman over there.
So, can I just say, a really good talk, actually, and you collected a lot of great data, which is really interesting. I'll come on one point you didn't show us, which I think they know. Everyone's talked about the politics, and some weird things about politics in this country. I mean, we have 600 and something MPs in Congress in America, a country 5 times the size, and about 300 and something.
Yeah.
We've got far too many of them. and probably they're not paid enough. Actually, there probably also be better people who are probably paid a bit more. It's interesting, everyone's quite keen on this issue of proportional representation. On the other hand, we do witness Israel, which has PR, witness what's happened recently in Italy, where they've got PR. There are other ways to do it. You can have single transferable votes. We could go down that route, which would allow us to continue to be a representative democracy, which is a feature that you lose when you go to PR. So I think there are some debates as to how you do it, but I'd certainly be on side with people who say that the present system isn't really up to scratch.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is we just want to have this debate. Are we talking about what we as individuals can do, or what the country can do? I think going on getting allotment is an individual decision. Deciding to go into cookery classes and learn how to cook better meals with not so expensive ingredients is a personal decision. Learning to decide what you do with your heating system or your electric car is a personal decision. From the country's perspective, there are of course things that you can do. It is just a shame that we don't currently have a batch of politicians who can articulate any of them. The middle ground of the Tories was kicked out by Boris at the time of Brexit. Yeah. And Starmer has built actually quite a lot of middle ground Labour people in his current government, and it's been quite interesting to see when at the moment he just stands back and watches the Tories shoot each other. When he actually puts something on the table, it's quite interesting to see what it is. But you hear him a bit through the grapevine, they seem to be having some quite good ideas. The thing I was just trying to say, where the data you did show us the GDP per capita. Yeah. And one of the most important things is the GDP per capita, because that is an index of what money the government can spend back on those very same people. Yeah. And so the number of people you've got and the amount of GDP per those people is really critical. And if you look at the world ranking for GDP per capita, it's very interesting. Anybody know where we are? We're around 27. And we're below Germany and France, just a bit above us. The United States a bit above that. Guess who's fifth? Ireland. Ireland has 1.5 times greater GDP per capita than we do in this country. And it's in a better place. Yeah. It's got more money to spend on its citizens. And how they got there? They got there because 20 years ago they said, we're fed up with our people going to dig roads in other countries. We're going to have educated people. And they invested in education. Now they had their funds in 2008, but they have an educated population, and that has been a magnet for jobs. Yeah. And so I think there are longer term ways of getting out of this around education, around living, and product purchases in the change, so that the money flows through and businesses stimulated. And we need the private sector and other businesses, and it's all the way back to the university, technical apprenticeships, and into the schools. What people do economic growth, the medium education and development of technologies, either blue or IT or whatever, you educate people.
Good. Somebody else in the room at the back there, and then we go back online. Anna, are you looking to ask a question as well? No. Okay. Trevor, just put your hand up. Are you looking to ask a question next as well? Good.
Right. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Right. 2 points I'd like to make. The first one is about politicians. I think in this country now we have a political class. You have people go to university, they join political clubs, they then come out and become researchers for one of the two main political parties. Then they become MPs, and they don't have any sort of knowledge of real life. Very few of them have actually worked. Like, I'm 75 years old, and when I was a kid, most politicians on the Tory side were ex-businessmen or army officers. On the Labour side, they were trade unionists who had actually worked in sort of industry. The second point I'd like to make is about the money markets. We haven't talked a lot about the money market, but money markets will damage democracy. Like the saying at the moment, the Tories are saying that they got to do certain things because of the money markets. But the money markets, in 2008, 2009, ordinary people bailed out the money markets because they couldn't get it right, the banks and all that lot. And all throughout my life, every time there's an economic crisis, Whatever government's in power and whatever people, whatever the money markets do, they are ordinary people to sort it out. In 2008, 2009, the banks almost collapsed. We bailed them out, and then we had austerity for 10 years. Now, because of various reasons, they're asking ordinary people now to, especially the poor, to pay for it. So that's how it works.
Okay, thank you. And just before we go online to Trevor, also to the gentleman here at the front row, I think the idea of GDP per capita is really, really important. And I think I'll probably put in a slide on GDP per capita before I send it out afterwards. But I think, you know, being 27th in the world on GDP per capita, where you are the 5th largest economy in terms of GDP, you know, if everything was equal, you would have thought actually Britain should be 5th to some extent, or even on a GDP per capita basis. And actually being 27, it shows there is some underlying issues in terms of productivity and other things which we haven't even got into. And I think your point about the money markets, I think, is something the whole financial market and the whole financial instruments, not just in the UK, but globally, is something that needs to be tackled. And I think it's going to be quite interesting what's going to happen in the autumn statement in less than 2 days' time, in terms of whether we are going to bear the brunt of everything or whether there's actually going to be a more balanced approach. Sally, in the back. Okay, I will do that my best next time round. So there's a gentleman here. Vicky, can you just pass the microphone to this gentleman there? That'd be great. And again, if you could speak directly into it, because otherwise the online audience won't be able to hear us.
I'd like to address that point about the money markets, because it's easy to blame the money markets and go back to 2008, and it's the banks that caused the problem. And the money markets have the cash and we're wondering where to put it. I mean, the only reason that politicians are having to be subservient to the needs of the money market is because you want to borrow hundreds of billions of pounds. If we had a more balanced economy where we didn't have exuberant debt, we wouldn't need to be influenced or to play to the needs of the money markets. But if I'm a money market person, when I've got £1 billion and the government is coming to me and saying, will you please let me have that £1 billion on a 30-year promise, I absolutely will make sure that I am confident that that economy is going to be absolutely rock solid, and in 30 years' time, will be able to pay me that my £1 billion back. And we cannot complain about the bond markets, we can't complain about the politicians who have got us into a situation where we are continually having to go back to the bond markets for continual borrowings of billions and billions of pounds.
Yeah. So, very good. And I think everybody heard that loud and clear online, yeah? No? No? Trevor, did you hear it? Because you're up next. Trevor, you can ask your question. Sorry, Anna. I'll try to paraphrase the questions next time.
Yeah, I thank you. I did hear it, and I totally disagree. First of all, just a comment that GDP as a measure of anything is surely being recognised as not very useful anymore, especially when compared with GDP and debt ratios. However, that's just a statement. I'm not going to ask a question. I want to make a statement. I think there are two institutes that we've got to get more than a hold of, and more than what you said, Andreas, some sort of control. That's the news media, who continuously bombard us with pessimism. And most of the results of the surveys that you showed are a result of people being influenced by the news media. It was a very strong survey that I read only today in the USA. People's opinions about what they think is the situation and what they think other people think of the situation. And their feeling about the situation was far more optimistic than what they thought other people thought, because they're not influenced by the media. So first of all, we've got to get hold of the media and stop calling pessimism. And secondly, we have to really get hold and do something about the money markets and the money markets in general. Whether what Liz Truss did would have worked or not, I don't know. I'm not in favour. There's arguments from both sides. But it was destroyed by the reaction of the money markets. And we can't let our economy become a so-called market-driven, markets by the markets, the stock market and the FX market. Someone, a few people made a lot of money a couple of weeks ago with the fluctuations in the money market, and that's got to stop. Otherwise, whatever the politicians do, it won't make any effect. And it's not caused by the politicians having access, having to borrow things. Debt is not a problem.
Okay, thank you for that, Trevor. Anna, did you hear that? Because that was online. You could hear that one. Yeah, good. Excellent. Anybody else online before we go back in the room? Yes, we've got Ian online. Ian, do you want to unmute yourself and then ask your question?
Thank you, Andreas. I noted that you talked about the need to deleverage and probably reverse some of the financial engineering. And I completely see your point there. But the problem with, there's a lot of leverage in the economy, but if you deleverage and you deleverage quickly, as they did in Greece, it is a negative growth effect and can easily push the country into depression. There are some aspects of deleverage, even in Greece, which I think are pretty positive. I mean, one of the things is that middle-class professional Greeks now drive little Hyundais and Fiat Pandas rather than expensive German cars. And I think that's probably quite a good thing. But overall, if you go for a mass deleveraging, you can really cause a depression.
Okay. Yeah, so basically what you're saying, Ian, is you need to have done this on a planned basis, right? A gradual planned basis.
Take care of it. You let inflation take care of it.
Okay, thank you. Now, should we go back to the room? We've done something online. Does anybody want to? We've talked about politicians quite a bit. We've talked about the economics. We haven't talked about the social side of things a lot, but please carry on.
Thank you. Just to say, Andreas, those slides are actually superb. You distilled everything that was really depressing, but which was great because the last slide with the 3 columns was the answers were all there before. I think one of the things we're missing is, I don't want to talk about politicians in this at all, but somehow we have huge opportunities to have all these things come opportunity. I think one of the things on the social side and the economic side, we've got a huge set of resources. We're an island surrounded by the second biggest client in the world. We could become the centre of excellence for alternative technologies. That would immediately chuck a load of money into GDP. There's so much we can do on the social side. In terms of per capita, we would have more people employed locally. We've been obsessed with offshoring everything to China, whereas we don't manufacture much here ourselves at all. Again, bringing that back. We've shot ourselves in the foot, in my mind, by leaving Europe because we've closed off a very close, large market, which we could become really quite a significant player in that. And some of the things we've been talking about, and politicians are part of the problem here because we need to get consensus in all this. We don't want party politics to involve us. Nobody will make a decision. For example, we've got a kind of vanity project now, which 2 years ago might have been okay with HS2. Now everybody uses Zoom, so we don't need to get to London 10 minutes quicker. What we need to do is spend the 55 billion that we're short on Friday or Thursday could be made up by scrapping HS2. So we just need to think a little bit more laterally about things. Yeah. But I do think alternate technologies are where we could be, self-sufficient. You don't need to align everything to the gas price, as you say. It's not relevant.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just pick up on that, because I think that's a really salient point about the energy.
Yeah.
And going back to your point about sovereign wealth fund.
Yeah.
So, why is Norway in such a brilliant position? Well, the Norwegian politicians, made some really great fundamental decisions when they were in a position to do it and screwed it away into a sovereign wealth fund. And we just gave most of ours away in tax cuts and here we are.
But with renewables, we do have that opportunity, and that's where Keir Starmer, I thought, was a blinder coming in and saying, we will set up a green energy company. And that gives us the opportunity to take the high ground on all renewables. It comes back into our ownership, so it talks to the point about being a strategic asset that we own. And we have the opportunity to create a sovereign wealth fund that will take us into the future. And somebody in the chat function was talking about, macro versus micro. Renewables have the opportunity to cross both boundaries. So I've got a friend of mine, and he's at the moment looking to invest into a hydro on the Prune River, and he's got 2 banks of solar panels. But it's not worth his while putting that money into the grid because the feed-in tariff is so poor. He's actually looking at setting up a local community around him to supply all his neighbours. So that's on the ground, what you can do on the ground. We could fix that so that we all became producers and we fed into the network, and we exploited what you're talking about, which is the sea that has one of the best tidal ranges that we have. We've got the opportunity to do something on a macro and a micro level.
Absolutely. Before we go to the next question, yes, you will get. It's just that the comment you made about the direction of the country, as well as you in terms of green. I think for what was missing is a vision or a plan that actually says this is the kind of country we want to be in the next 10, 20 years. Not specifically, this is the GDP we want, but actually just a high level view that you could actually share. It doesn't matter which political side of the spectrum you come from, whether you get there by 4x4 or by public transport, so to speak. There's something where you should be able to have a view of what you would want the country to be like, and I mean everybody, which you can have a consensus around, and then you build from there, as opposed to these disparate individual actions which seem to be either firefighting or self-serving. So I totally agree. Now over to the gentleman at the back.
The chap just mentioned Norway. I'm reminded that the happiest country in the world is Finland, and Denmark and Sweden and Norway are also up there. They're all much more equal than the countries that you mentioned. And I don't think we give enough consideration to inequality. The levelling up process is very important. I think HS2 is absolutely vital, because otherwise we're doomed to have the South getting richer and the North getting poorer and poorer. But that's probably what it is anyway. But I think we ought to struggle against it.
Yeah. So now there's lots of hands going up. So we'll just to respond to that. So I think the idea that HS2 is important in terms of levelling up, I think is an interesting observation. And I think the question is whether the transport link between the north and the south is going to create that, or whether actually manufacturing and production and new industries in the north would actually be more effective than the investment in the train line itself. But that's another discussion point to be had, because I think the main point, and I think the previous gentleman made, is rather than spending the money on tax cuts, creating potential future value is good. And if you do that across the board, then your happiness index is likely to be higher. I mean, I must say, I feel sorry for the Nordics about their weather, because 6 months of the year they're quite depressed. And I think the Finns, although they're the happiest people in the world, are quite nervous at the moment in terms of what's going on in Russia. But I think by and large, it is interesting, because it comes back to a vision of the country, actually having a certain attitude to life, right? And what it means to be happy in terms of what is important is part of that vision. And I think we haven't quite really got a view of what that might be like. Anyway. Right, David, I think, next.
That makes it happy or not? Yes.
Temporarily, maybe.
Temporarily.
So far, no one has mentioned quantitative easing. Now, quantitative easing, the government can create as much money as it wants if there's work to be done. Now, the reason why Liz Truss got into trouble was that she was going to do quantitative easing to give tax cuts to the rich. And that's why the bond markets got upset and started realising this was just a stupid thing to do. Now, the whole point is that very often people say, oh, too much quantitative easing will cause inflation. Inflation can be controlled by the tax system. And quantitative easing is, if there's work to be done, the money can be found. It was found when the banks needed it, and it was found when the pension industry needed it. And it wasn't that that caused inflation. So all this work that needs doing, the health service and all the rest of it, education, the money is there if there's a will to use it. People don't seem to realise that when a bank gives you a mortgage, they are creating money. It's literally a few keys on the computer keyboard and there's your money. Now, when you pay the money back to the bank, that money's gone. Yeah. It's a promise to pay. That's a fiat economy. That's what we've got. The government doesn't want us to understand that because they want to think of it like a household running, household debt and maxing out the credit card because they want a small state. Yeah. And that's one way of getting it is to say we just haven't got the money for it.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting observation, and I think equating government debt to personal debt or even corporate debt is the misnomer. And I think, as Trevor mentioned, debt is not the issue. At a governmental level, because you create debt all the time. I suppose at the governmental level, it only really becomes an issue when the merry-go-round stops, like it did in Greece, for example. Then there's an issue. But generally, actually circulating debt around is not so much an issue. But that's even more of an issue for us as individuals. Because at individual level, we feel household debt. We feel mortgage debt. We feel other debts. So I think there needs to be, absolutely right, I agree with you, there needs to be much more clarity in terms of how the international money market actually works and what the dynamics are. So I think we can agree on that. Anybody next? Oh, more hands going up over there. Is there anybody who wants to say something they haven't had a chance to say? The lady here, maybe we go there first, Vicky, because I think this side of the room, they've had their first bite of the cherry.
I think the thing you've been talking about is the gap between rich and poor that's been growing over the last decade, at least, in fact, longer. The 80s, it was going narrowing in the 70s, and then since then it's increased. And as sort of generally being mentioned here, public services have to be improved if you're going to actually level up, because the only chance people have got at the very bottom to improve themselves is if they have access to good health, if they have access to a good education, if they have access to the legal system and the police. I mean, there's some states where they're just not going to bother if the crime is committed against you. Yeah. And in general, other public services that probably haven't mentioned. Yeah. And I would imagine that what's going to happen on Thursday, was it Friday, that there's going to be further cuts.
Yeah, so this,
and they don't seem to be in a good position at the moment. Yeah. Certainly the media press is very depressing about public services.
Well, yeah, and obviously, public debt, the interest on public debt is also increasing, or has increased recently. So, but I think the issue is that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are basically trying to do something that nobody really had considered before, which is actually trying to move free market neoclassical economics with Keynesian economics of debt and spending. The problem was the spending they were trying wasn't actually to do productive things like you suggested in terms of infrastructure and projects that would create value. Their money was going to be spent in terms of reducing taxation. And that's where I think the market had a bit of apoplexy and says, well, hold on, you're trying to blend two opposite economic models here, Keynesian economics and neoclassical economics, and actually what you're trying to achieve is actually none of the above. And I think that was, well, we can't have this, and hence less is one. Robin, over to you. No, so the lady in the front first, and then Robin.
It becomes very clear that there is no country identity that people can buy into and believe that there is no vision. And if you look at successful countries, Ireland was mentioned, if you look at the identity that's created through education, through apprenticeships, people believe very strongly in their roots and where they came from. If you look at what's happened in England, and this is a very simplistic approach, but Brexit happened because people identified within England from the 40s and 50s when empire, everything was great. And that's what they wanted to create again. But it was so, the short-termism was, there weren't the resources for that to happen. No. And I think unless you can get clear leaders across a number of institutions where people believe and work towards something, and the renewable energies one is a great one because we're an island, tidal, why aren't we doing it? And I think that is what is really lacking. And it may not be the politicians who can do that in a broken system, but it needs to be somebody, because in successful countries, that's what they've got.
Yeah, here. Robin, over to you.
As I say, I don't understand what neo-Keynesian or neo-classical economics is. I just don't want to live in a country where children are going to school hungry.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to have a health service where nurses have to use food banks. This is about, you know, basic decency. It's not about anything else. And until we are encouraged to think in those sorts of ways, I don't think we're going to get out of this. Sadly, I think the people who own our presses are not interested in any of this sort of thing. They've got an entirely different agenda.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you ask any human being, you know, would you want nurses to have to go to food banks to feed themselves? Would you want children to go cold or hungry at school? All of those questions, you know, real life examples. They're not like some sort of concepts. They're real things. Nobody in the world will say, yes, of course, I'm just out to food myself. Everybody will say, no, of course, in the fifth largest economy, with the 27th largest GDP per capita, you know, that shouldn't be happening. But then, if you ask a different question, and you ask people, how much more money...
And say, you can't have this and a house which worth £1.5 million pounds. There's a 3-bedroom semi.
Yeah.
And you can't just pay this amount of tax. You've got to realistically say to people,
but that's,
you have to make these choices.
Yeah. So you have to make these choices. But these are the conversations that should be happening at a societal level.
And then not only politicians that have to have those conversations.
Yeah.
It is about what type of country do we want to live in. You know, and there will be people in Bath that will be spending, you know, probably £100 to £150 to decorate the outside of their house with Santas and feel that that's fantastic. And people will drive past looking at, oh look, at the Santas on that house, where people in the next street are having to go to food bank, and people put up with it because there is no common view of this is the type of country that we want to live in. And the one thing that we haven't covered yet is the demographic time bombs going off in this country. So I think in 3 years' time, more people will have retired than are actually in work. And a lot of people, due to COVID, took early retirement. So we've got a lot of people now who are either semi-retired or actually retired. And whether we like it or not, look at the demographic in this room, you know, whether we like it or not, people who get towards or are in retirement tend to be more resistant to change. Yeah. So we're trying to develop a new model, a new way of thinking, a new way of living with an increasing group of the population that would really like to freeze the country as it is, thank you very much, because they're okay.
I was going to say we should really finish with Santa. in your comment about Santel today. But I think we've literally got one more question. I think the gentleman in the back, because he hasn't had his go yet. So, we'll finish with you with something positive. So, two more questions. So, this gentleman, then you in the back.
Sorry. I just wanted to follow up on your point there. It's just absolutely right. Young people just completely disengaged with the entire political, economic status of the world. They're so pessimistic. I can talk to any of my colleagues in this, and they just have no faith in positive change or anything at all. It's really sad to see. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's all really very cool. Sorry.
Well, and I think that, for you saying that, I think that's one of the key things that people should be encouraged to get involved in. To actually see that there is a change possible. We'll finish off with a positive note here at the front, and then, sorry, Robin, but we need to finish. But before the answer to the last question,
differential voting. I think 20 you get a vote. You get 2 people vote. If you're over 60, you get signing up 1 person.
Excellent. Good. Over to you. Finish off.
So I just want to have a positive note. If you can remember COVID and everyone here had their vaccinations, the nation stepped forward. It was volunteers, it was school leavers, it was retired people. They stepped forward and led this. There was a fantastic spirit in this country to help other people. And it was wonderful seeing the volunteers coming forward. And now everyone stepped back. Actually, people can continue to step forward. I sit on the board of an integrated health system which covers this whole area. And we spend a lot of time thinking about how to help people in disadvantaged communities, how to help their health, how to improve their livelihood, working with the council. And actually, one of the missing pieces is there are lots of people who would come back into the workforce part-time, voluntarily, in all sorts of shapes and forms. Yeah. And actually, that's what we need. Yeah. We need people to come out and go and help their neighbours.
Yeah. Excellent. That's a great way to finish. And I think it shows. And I think the lesson from this last comment is that every single person can make a big difference. And it's sometimes very easy to be overawed by the fact that the country is going to pots and the politicians don't care and things like that. Everybody can make a positive contribution to change this around. And I think the pandemic has shown that. So thank you to all of you for contributing. I hope this worked for you. I just want to share with you a couple of things that are coming up after that. But please give yourself a big, big thank you, because that was a great discussion. So well done. So one quick question, and this is for online as well, if you could put it in the chat. Does this kind of format work where it isn't just a lecture and a Q&A, but it's a bit of a ongoing discussion with everybody contributing? Does that work for people?
I think the graphics were not clear.
Yes.
The text you couldn't really.
Yes.
It should be some sort of contrast.
Yeah.
Because they are meaningless. Not meaningless, but
that's why I
can't see without it.
Okay.
I wonder about a different arrangement to rule, where it's arranged as either a single circle of desk, or maybe as separate groups in a sort of citizens' assembly.
Yes.
Set up where we're sitting in small groups,
absolutely,
things and then coming together. There were lots of really interesting discussions here that I'd like to have picked up, continued. But there's only one person speaking. There's only really time for one person. Yeah. There are technical problems with bringing people in. All of that means that a discussion becomes much harder.
Yes.
And I'd love to continue this discussion in a pub.
Yeah. So this is really good feedback. But I think the concept of how group discussions is a positive thing. Getting the technology right and maybe the slides right. That's what I'm getting from everybody. They actually appreciate, and the room layout. But I think that the technology and the room layout are to some extent linked. Oh, Trevor, final.
No, I'm not going to make a comment on what the subject was, but it is very difficult to hear the questions in the auditorium. Very, very difficult. See, okay. Andreas, where you're stood, we can hear you very clearly. I don't know whether that microphone is a much more powerful microphone than the one that goes around the audience, but we cannot hear the questions in the audience.
Right. We try to overcome that by linking the roving mic to the room and the computer, but it's clearly not working yet. So more to be done. Okay, well, thank you very much for the feedback and well done. I just want to mention the forthcoming activities. It takes 1 minute. We don't have anything in December because the last lecture in here in December is the Christmas lecture, and that would be Dr. Tristram Hunt, the CEO of the V&A, giving a talk about the cultural significance of museums. So please come along to that. In January, the World Affairs series continues with the politics of climate change. That's pretty relevant after COP27. Then in February, it will be the anniversary of the war in Ukraine. And I don't know how many of you saw the meeting we had last year when it started. But we have the same two professors from America joining us again, one from California, one from New York, online, to talk about the current state of things and the future potential trajectories of that, which I think is going to be very important. And then I think we've got a follow-up in March, and we're not sure, that's probably going to be Letters from America, Alistair Cook. So that's going to be a film that's going to be shown here in March. Nothing in April yet, but in May, we have a talk on artificial intelligence, living with intelligent machines. So I don't think they mean Alexa by that. But never mind. Have a great time. I hope to see you for the Christmas lecture. If not, have a great Christmas, and I'll see you soon. All the very best.